Happening now, the United Nations Security Council is holding a meeting on the situation in Venezuela. Here are live pictures from the UN in New York. The emergency meeting was called by the US, which on Monday imposed new sanctions against the Venezuelan government. The new penalties were announced after US Vice President Mike Pence met with opposition lawmaker Juan Guaidó in Colombia during a Lima Group meeting.
At the same time, the Lima Group has appealed to the Secretary General of the United Nations so that, in accordance with his powers, he promote the activation of the United Nations system with regard to what is happening in Venezuela.
Meanwhile, South Africa's ruling African National Congress has reaffirmed its support for Venezuela's government.
The ANC and its alliance partners affirmed their solidarity with the people of Venezuela in finding a political solution to the benefit of all the people of Venezuela. And the tripartite alliance led by the African National Congress delegation, we will soon be visiting Venezuela on a fact-finding mission, but as part of solidarity with the people of Venezuela under the leadership of President Maduro as elected by the electorate.
Our correspondent in South Africa, Matuba Malachi, has more.
South Africa's ruling African National Congress has reiterated its support for President Nicolas Maduro's government. Now, the message of support for Venezuela came during the party's bi-weekly media briefings on Tuesday. The ANC says it will mobilize its alliance partners, which includes the South African Communist Party and trade unions here in South Africa, to plan a trip to Venezuela. They've labeled it as a fact-finding mission and also a gesture to the people of Venezuela, encouraging them to find a political solution. But South Africa is adamant also that it will not support any government formed outside an electoral process. This is something that the United States has been threatening to impose on Venezuela. The planned trip to Venezuela by the South African ruling party will be a bold step in support of President Maduro amid threats of military action against President Maduro's government. The ANC also said it would use this visit to pay tribute to the late President Hugo Chavez as the anniversary of his death is approaching. It's back to you, studio.
Thank you, Matuba. International delegates at the People's Assembly in Caracas have visited the Public Housing Mission. Our correspondent, Luis Tavera, is with them.
Delegations from the 5 continents are here visiting a housing complex built by Venezuela's Public Housing Mission. They've come to find out firsthand about the program of social inclusion and to counter the distorted pictures so often given by the international media. So let's talk to one of those delegates. Please tell me your name and what you think of this experience.
¿Y qué te ha parecido a ti esta experiencia acá en Venezuela?
Llamo Vigna Tavares, soy de Cabo Verde.
I'm Vigna Tavares from Cabo Verde. I can see that these homes are very comfortable for people. From what I've seen so far, it seems the government is always trying to attend to the needs of the people. People seem to be happy. They seem to have enough basic food to survive okay.
What kind of news reaches your country about Venezuela, and how does that compare with the reality you are seeing now?
It is lies, because in my country, my mother asked me yesterday, "Are you alright there?" Because on the TV they say people are going hungry. They have no food. I said no. I'm here having lunch normally. So now I can see that those versions are false. They are lies, to try to show that everything is bad in Venezuela. But to me, it seems fine.
Well, that's another view of the reality here. To to contrast with the mainstream accounts, which these delegates say their own experience here is showing to be false. At this housing mission, they have also been able to discuss with ordinary Venezuelans and with social movements, who tell them that in Venezuela there's not a humanitarian crisis, and that this is just a pretext for foreign intervention.
And now let's go back to New York, where our correspondent Jorge Gestoso joins us live for more details on the UN Security Council meeting. Jorge.
Stefania, the meeting is taking place now. It's been asked by the United States that they continue to try to put pressure to overthrow, to confirm the intentions of the coup d'etat against government President Maduro. We did have the opportunity to go to
Mr. Jorge Arriaza, the foreign minister of Venezuela, and yesterday he was talking on TV in the U.S., and he was mentioning a couple of things that are very important. First, that the coup d'etat has failed this past weekend, even though all the efforts of the U.S. and some of the countries of the region to try to do it. And the second part is, given though that officially there is a hard line that is being played, for example, we were hearing just a few minutes ago at the Security Council talking under the name of the U.S., Elliot Abrams, that has been classified as a war criminal by many human rights organizations, and he's the point man, quote unquote, point man to Venezuela. Everybody realizes that in reality what he's an expert is on coup d'etat, as he did in Central America in the years of the 90s. Well, even though the heart of the rhetoric of Elliot Abrams and the rhetoric of the Vice President Mike Pence is no more dialogue, Abrams was saying the time of dialogue has long gone by. Jorge Arriaza was confirming yesterday that there are still negotiations going on between the U.S. government and the government of Venezuela, so much so, he was mentioning, that the President Maduro was extending the stay of the delegation of diplomats in the U.S. in Caracas in order for those negotiations to continue. So there are, what the conclusion of Mr. Arriaza is, this is pure politics. In reality, they're trying to put together something, as Arriaza mentioned, it's a show, media show, trying to paint a picture with any excuse in order to reach the oil of Venezuela. That's what Mr. Arriaza, that is, at this moment we were watching it, that is going to participate. In this very moment, France is addressing the national security at the UN. And the fact is, there is a litany of a few countries in Latin America, the U.S., and the complicity of some European nations, and the rest of the world is absolutely against that type of interventions. And not to make this participation too long, very important, Stefania, what an expert in the UN, what is called Alfred de Zayas, has clarified. This is what the U.S. and this group of countries are doing, and what we are hearing now at the UN is absolutely illegal. They are breaking all the charters of the UN. They are breaking all or disrespecting all the charters of the international jurisdiction, and they are not necessarily respecting even the constitution of Venezuela, because, for example, when this gentleman, Guaido, is saying that he's referring to an article and that he says that given the certain powers, it's absolutely wrong. Definitely, there's not such thing. So, in reality, what we are witnessing once again is the efforts of leading by the U.S. and a few countries in the world trying to overthrow a government in order, according to the confirmation of Mr. Arriaza, to take control of the oil in Venezuela at any price, at any cost, with any rhetoric, and with any type of
Jorge, we thank you so much for your report. We'll get back to you throughout the day. More news now. Violent opposition protesters at the Colombian-Venezuelan border have set trucks on fire that were allegedly carrying humanitarian aid into Venezuela. On Saturday, the same protesters set the same trucks on fire and threw Molotov cocktails at the Bolivarian National Guard. Following the fire, an inspection revealed that the trucks were carrying equipment to be used by violent opposition protesters. This afternoon, violent protests have continued at the border. CARICOM nations are meeting in St. Kitts and Nevis for a two-day summit. They are discussing the unfolding political situations in Venezuela, Haiti, and Guyana, as well as the Caribbean single market and economy and closer regional cooperation on transport. CARICOM members are expected to ratify their support for the Montevideo mechanism that seeks dialogue and a peaceful solution in Venezuela.
The community maintains that the solution must come from among the Venezuelan people and abides by the internationally recognized and accepted principles of non-interference, non-intervention in the affairs of states, respect for sovereignty, adherence to the rule of law, and respect for human rights and democracy. And that principle of non-interference also applies as we confront a persistent threat to our efforts at development. I refer to the labeling of our countries by the European Union.
Our correspondent Laura Prada is there and has more.
It's also going to take place an information now space where members of the CARICOM are going to get more information about what's going on in Venezuela, in Haiti, and in Guyana. As we know, these are topics, these are themes that are very important in these days in the media. Besides this, we must remember that CARICOM plays a very important and leading role in the area because they are a 14-member group, and in the region they are known for always working together and always keeping a similar position and translating their foreign policies in that same address. So we'll be here in this today meeting and we'll be informing you what's taking place right now. Delegations are meeting at closed doors behind me right now in this saloon that is behind me. Members are meeting. After the inauguration took place, they asked that press and other persons that were invited went out so they could talk and discuss and deliver other topics on private. And later on, tomorrow, we'll know their final declaration. Right now, they are still working, and in the breaks they'll have during the day, we'll be talking to some of them to know what their ideas, their thoughts are regarding the situations in the region and in the world, but also what is the Caribbean working forward. We'll be talking again, so I get back to you.
That was Laura Prada from St. Kitts and Nevis. Prime Minister Narendra Modi assures Indians they are in safe hands after New Delhi announces that its warplanes attacked a militant camp in Pakistani territory. India said Tuesday its warplanes attacked a militant camp where Pakistan-backed fighters were preparing suicide attacks on its cities, sending tensions between the arch rivals to a new peak. India's government confirmed it launched an airstrike in the city of Balakat, targeting a training camp of the Jaish-e-Mohammed group, killing a large number of its members. Tensions have been escalating between the two neighbors following a suicide bombing attack held by the group that killed more than 40 Indian troops in the disputed region of Kashmir this month. Indian Air Force jets crossed into Pakistani territory for the first time since the two sides fought in a war in 1971.
In the face of imminent danger, a preemptive strike became absolutely necessary. In an intelligence-led operation in the early hours of today, India struck the biggest training camp of the Jaish-e-Mohammed in Balakot. In this operation, a very large number of Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorists, trainers, senior commanders, and groups of jihadis who were being trained for Fidaiin action were eliminated. The government of Pakistan had made a solemn commitment in January 2004 not to allow its soil or territory under its control to be used for terrorism against India. We expect that Pakistan lives up to its public commitment and takes follow-up action to dismantle all JEM and other camps and hold the terrorists accountable for their actions.
The International Court of Justice has established that Britain should return the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. In a non-binding advisory opinion, the World Court says Britain should give up control over the island located in the Indian Ocean. It also adds Britain had wrongfully forced the population to leave in the 1970s to make a way for a U.S. airbase. Mauritius claims the islands, as it says, it has been forced to give up to gain independence from Britain.
Having regard to international law, the process of decolonization of Mauritius was not lawfully completed when that country acceded to independence in 1968 following the separation of the Chagos archipelago.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. Survivors of Guatemala's civil war have protested against the government's proposal of granting amnesty to soldiers accused of war crimes. Victims believe the move would increase impunity in the country. Let's find out more.
Relatives of those lost in Guatemala's brutal 36-year civil war marked the National Day of Dignity. A number of them took to the streets in Guatemala City to oppose the government's proposal of granting amnesty to soldiers accused of war crimes.
This new law will let imprisoned criminals free. Why would they do such thing? Who has the right for justice if not us? They will laugh at us for the crimes they committed as they have done in the past like we are nothing.
If the bill is passed, soldiers convicted of rape, murder and torture will have to be released within 24 hours. Any ongoing investigation against them will be abolished.
This will not also increase impunity, but also violate the right for truth and justice of thousands of victims and survivors of the civil war.
The victims' families have filed a legal redress at the Constitutional Court to stop the Congress from passing that bill. They want a highest court of justice to throw the bill out, on the grounds that it would be illegal to grant amnesty to people convicted of war crimes.
It goes against all agreements on human rights that Guatemala signed. It would just create more impunity.
The civil war raged between 1960 and 1996, killing at least 200,000 people and displacing more than 1 million. 20 years ago, a UN-backed commission found that the government was responsible for more than 90% of killings, torture, and forced disappearances. Families of victims say that passing the amnesty bill will be an insult and a grave injustice.
Costa Rica seeks to introduce a stricter gun control law to tackle growing violence in the country. The new reform would reduce the number of firearms a civilian can register under their name from 3 to 1. Under the current law, owning a weapon without a proper registration is punished with community work, but the new bill would issue prison sentences. Costa Rica has one of the highest rates of gun-related homicides in the world, with around 11.7 deaths per 100,000 inhabitants.
We will insist. We will maintain the position of a single weapon. At most, we evaluate the possibility of adding a second weapon in the cases of people who have a farm, with a person who manages the place, and this person can carry an additional one.
At least 50 people are dead after intense rains in the north and central Peru. The rain caused severe floods and that damaged bridges, schools, and other infrastructure. Thousands of people were affected and residents are calling the government to do more to help them.
I'm calling on President Martín Vizcarra to please come to the area so you can hear what we need and what we are asking for, and to please make building a bridge over the San Francisco ravine a priority.
Brazilian Ford workers and union members have battled rain in Sao Paulo to protest against the automaker's decision to close down its operations in the country. About 2,000 protesters marched after the U.S. car giant announced it will close down a plant which employs almost 3,000 workers. The facility has been manufacturing heavy trucks for over half a century. Ford says it's closing the plant to reduce payroll costs.
They've spoken about it for years, but we didn't expect it. Everyone is desperate. No one has a plan B here.
Now to Nigeria. President Muhammadu Buhari maintains his lead over his main rival, Atiku Abubakar. Results have been declared in 15 of the 36 states after Saturday's general election. Buhari so far has claimed 5.4 million votes compared to Abubakar's 4.4 million. However, Abubakar's People's Democratic Party has described the partial results as incorrect and unacceptable.
The result we've seen, for me, is okay. The result I've seen so far, to an extent, is a true reflection of the wishes of Nigeria. So far, I'm satisfied with the conduct of the election, irrespective of what other people's opinion might be. So far, I'm satisfied.
It's not a free and fair election. Let me tell you, it's not a free and fair election. It's not how this ringing of election is not supposed to be. I have to tell you the truth. Paying money for election, these people entering yard to yard, collect their names, collect their this thing. Yes, collect their names, collect their phone number. They will give them money, and I'm not lying.
Teachers in the Ivory Coast are entering their 6th week of a strike. But now students have also started protesting to demand schools reopen. Secondary and primary school teachers are demanding better salaries and the payment of bonuses and of housing expenses. The strike has affected students in all levels of the Ivorian educational system.
For more than 2 months now, schools have been closed, from secondary to higher education, from primary to secondary. There are no classes. So today we are marching peacefully to demand the reopening of schools in the Ivory Coast.
Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir has announced new measures to end protests that have rocked the nations for more than 12 weeks. Some of the measures include a ban on unauthorized rallies and marches. He has also given the country's security forces sweeping powers to raid buildings where they suspect that illegal activities are taking place. The decree comes as fresh anti-government protests broke out in different parts of the capital, Khartoum. Afghan politician and women's rights activist Fawzia Koofi has explained how hard it was for her to face Taliban militants who jailed her husband, threatened to stone her for wearing nail polish, and almost assassinated her when she became a high-profile MP. Earlier this month, she took up the invitation to Moscow to stand before her oppressors.
I wanted to make women issues equality and the major point of discussions, and I think I succeeded in that. Now, does that mean that the Taliban perspective or other delegation perspective has changed? No, that's not for guarantee. I'm not satisfied or certain that we can trust this process when it comes to the women's rights.
In the UK, Prime Minister Theresa May has offered lawmakers a chance to vote to delay Brexit if MPs reject both her deal and the prospect of leaving the EU without an agreement. Speaking to Parliament, May said that if she had failed to get approval of her deal by March 12th, the lawmakers would be giving a vote on March 13th on leaving without a deal. If that was rejected, lawmakers would then have a vote on March 14th on a motion requesting Brexit deal.
As part of these discussions, the UK and EU will all be supported by...
Let's go live to New York, where South Africa is speaking.
Serious racist regimes through dialogue and believes that internal, inclusive dialogue remains the only viable and sustainable path to any political crisis in Venezuela. Political dialogue should seem obvious and the first logical port of call. Yet, the action of some in the international community have not been conducive and encouraging to this approach. Isolating and vilifying one party and calling for a specific prescribed course of action which will preclude dialogue will only ferment possible recourse to armed conflict. I reiterate, this is inconsistent with the purpose of UN Security Council. The President, South Africa does not believe that the situation in Venezuela poses a threat to regional peace and security. The efforts of the Security Council in the situation in Venezuela should be framed by Chapter 6 of the UN Charter, where parties are encouraged first of all to seek a solution through negotiations, inquiry, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, and judicial settlement or other peaceful means of their own choice. Forcing the parties to accede and accept a prescribed and prescription to resolve their own crisis, including through ultimatums, will only encourage further antagonism and division. Therefore, we call on this Council and all those truly interested in the peaceful resolution of the crisis in Venezuela to consider the question: what is alternative to dialogue? The alternative, as we have seen in other cases where dialogue was ignored by some in this Council, will be a prolonged crisis and possible military entanglement. This will only be to the further detriment of the people of Venezuela. Mr. President, South Africa is deeply concerned about the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. We are alarmed at the unrest and loss of life that has taken place over the past weekend. Instead of assisting the people of Venezuela, the politicization and indeed weaponization of humanitarian assistance have served to aggravate tension in Venezuela. That can only lead to violence and confrontation. It is of utmost importance that support to the people of Venezuela does not serve as a focal point for increased tension and antagonism, or become a tool in the political dispute that is being coaxed by some external parties and actors. We believe that humanitarian aid should not be used for the political ends of parties to the crisis, but should be delivered through United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs to ensure its neutrality and impartiality. Mr. President, this Council cannot predetermine the will of the people of Venezuela. Therefore, the international community should promote a framework of inclusive internal dialogue in order for the people of Venezuela to determine their own destiny. I thank you, Mr. President.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks to the representative of South Africa. I now give the floor to the representative of Kuwait.
And now let's go back to Venezuela and some breaking news. On Monday, Univision reported Jorge Ramos was removed from Venezuela following a contentious interview with President Nicolás Maduro. On his return to the U.S., Ramos was questioned by journalist Max Blumenthal. Here's the exchange.
Any plans to confront Marco Rubio about his threat to kill Nicolás Maduro by posting pictures of him and Gaddafi? Any plans to confront Marco Rubio about his threats of military invasion, or to confront Donald Trump about the sanctions on Venezuela?
What I can tell you is that many people here in the United States supporting what we were doing, and that Marco Rubio Vice President Pence, and many others were supporting what we were doing over there.
And Max Blumenthal just sent us this report about the incident.
I'm in Miami-Dade International Airport, and I just wandered off a flight from Caracas when I walked right into a press conference with Jorge Ramos, the Univision personality, who was surrounded by a gaggle of fawning press as he talked about his 3-hour detention at Miraflores Palace by the guard of Nicolas Maduro after he engineered a confrontation with Maduro about people digging through trash in Caracas, as if that doesn't happen minutes from the White House. I've actually seen it many times. I wandered up and asked Ramos, now that he's back in the U.S., if he had any plans to confront the sitting senator in Florida, Marco Rubio, about his call for the murder of Maduro, which he did on Twitter repeatedly, juxtaposing pictures of Gaddafi before and after his murder in reference to what he'd like to see happen to Maduro. Ramos's response was absolutely stunning. Not only did he refuse to answer my question, he actually said that he had the support in Venezuela of Vice President Mike Pence and Marco Rubio himself, that he was acting essentially as a proxy of Rubio, Pence, and the Trump administration's plan for regime change and its threats of military violence against Venezuela. So here you have the ultimate gotcha ambush journalist facing a tough question and not being able to answer, and admitting that he's not such an independent journalist after all, that he's actually a proxy of the U.S. regime change machine. And there are few better exchanges than the one that I just had with Jorge Ramos to demonstrate the role that corporate media is playing in Latin America in pushing for the recolonization of countries like Venezuela and Nicaragua and supplying the mood music for regime change.
Thank you, Max, for that. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram for Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.